But he sees the world with a realistic nihilism that we really like. So here's his spot in the showcase, introducing Loki.
It's always in his hand. I don't know if that's a vital.
Do you want a hand job? Sorry. Sorry.
I never know that.
Sorry, officer. Sorry.
I do something a little bit different. I do mostly short stories. All my poetry turns into pornography, which is just disgraceful. But anyway, these stories that
Should be more of it.
oh, that's true. I agree. Anyway, some of these stories that I'll tell, I won't say whether they're true or not, but if they were true, people would definitely hurt during the filming of these episodes. The first story is a tribute to Ricky. Ricky was from the old school. How old school? He had love tattooed across one knuckle and hate tattooed across the other. Classic prison tats. Ricky was about 6'4" and he weighed 120 kilograms. I'd like to say he was a gentle giant, but if I did, I would be lying. There wasn't a great deal of gentle about him. Instead, there was a lot of violence and fear mixed with a fair smattering of hate and aggression. And yet he radiated this calmness, this self-assurance which said, I'm in control here, I can take whatever you give me, but if you push me too far, I'm going to fucking kill you. And nobody ever did because they knew that unspoken threat was real. Ricky spent 5 out of his last 6 years of his life in prison. In fact, he spent probably at least 80% of his entire life incarcerated in one form or another. He was one of those guys that needed a structured environment due to a fucked up upbringing. I think they call it institutionalised. In the early 2000s, he was busted by the cops driving late at night with bolt cutters, screwdrivers, pliers, hammers and a cattle prod. He was arrested and charged with possessing tools for housebreaking, and given his extensive record, he was always going away for a long time. Nobody ever bothered to ask how a cattle prod could be used for housebreaking, but by that point nobody cared. The truth is those tools were never used for housebreaking. That wasn't Ricky's go, but they were tools of his trade, because he was a debt collector, and this is how he operated. Ricky would pick up a drug dealer in his car and drive around to the house of the poor schmoo who owed the drug dealer money. He would calmly knock on the door and go inside when invited or kick the door in when not. He would then bail the debtor up in a corner and in plain sight pay the drug dealer however much money was owed out of his own pocket. Ricky would then send the appropriately compensated drug dealer on his way before looking at the poor guy in the eye and say, now you owe me. Then out would come the tools of the trade, including the cattle prod. He tried to go straight. In the early 1990s, he had a job as an interstate truck driver, driving big double trucks between capital cities. And it all seemed to be going well until one day when he was driving west along the main road, ironically near Adelaide, where he spent most of his life, when some random decided to commit suicide by jumping from the side of the road in front of his truck. Ricky took that as a message and descended back into drug addiction and the life of crime he'd always known. It's a pretty tragic tale, but he always told the story with a resigned, wry smile on his face. Such is life. Ricky and I had a good understanding. We were always straight with one another and we both acknowledged the game with which we both had to play. When we got the chance, he would tell me stories about his life in the underbelly of society, and I would tell him stories about being in the army and my semi-normal life afterwards. I think he liked hearing about my family and adventures interstate and overseas. It was much a glimpse into another world for him as his stories were for me. I'd go as far as to say I liked the guy, and in a different set of circumstances we could have been mates. At the start of 2010, Ricky got parole and was living at his brother's house. His brother is a pretty notorious guy. On one hot day, Ricky grabbed a bottle of coke out of his brother's fridge and sculled it down. About 24 agonising hours later, he was dead, having died of total organ failure. What he thought was coke was actually weed killer, and apparently he'd been so drunk at the time he hadn't noticed the coke not quite tasting like coke should. Why it was there in the first place is a whole nother story in itself, the ramifications of which are still playing out across Adelaide today. It must have been a pretty horrible way to go out, yet the story of his death seemed to fit the story of his life. Ricky was okay, not a guy that you'd like to get on the wrong side of, or the type of guy you want your parents to know that you're hanging around with, but he was alright. Ricky was from the old school. This next story is called Shooting Cats for Jesus. So you're Jesus, I asked with not the slightest hint of sarcasm. Yes, I am, he replied. Jesus is in Jesus. I'm hoping this is simply a case of multicultural misunderstanding. No, Jesus is in Jesus the Christ. Okay then, Jesus, I need you to put the crossbow down.
Behind my back, I tighten the grip on the taser I'm deliberately keeping out of view. If Jesus doesn't put that crossbow down, he's going to be on the receiving end of a modern-day crucifixion, courtesy of 50,000 folks. Thankfully, the crossbow clatters on the ground. Jesus, circa 2011, is a tall and skinny man who I guess would be aged about 50. His long, grey, scraggly hair hangs loosely around his shoulders, framing a weathered and life-worn face complete with Grizzly Adams-style beard. Most interestingly, he is wearing a full camouflage clothing, complete with loose netting and strips of material which is known as a ghillie suit in the army. It's like Chewbacca had fallen into a bush and then decided to shuffle down the side of a main suburban road at 2 o'clock in the morning carrying his crossbow. Once inside the car, Jesus tells me he's a peaceful man. He doesn't remember when or where he was born, but does remember having his awakening several years ago when God appeared to him and told him that he was Jesus while he was sleeping under a bridge in Melbourne. It had come to him as a shock, and he felt a little pissed off with God because he hadn't been given any special miracle-performing powers at the same time, although he hadn't given up hope in that regard. As we drive to the hospital, he explains that he often likes to hunt and shoot stray cats at night with a crossbow to provide himself and his dogs with food. Apparently, cat jerky is a great treat and wildly popular in several of the overseas countries through which he has walked. He stole the crossbow from a shop in country South Australia, but since he didn't answer to man's law, he informed me there was nothing I could do about that, but I thanked him for his honesty anyway.
Good.
He also noted that I was a calm and caring soul and there was a special place for me in heaven so long as I didn't take his crossbow, which of course I had to. So I figure now I'm pretty much condemned. Later, after leaving him in the care of the mental health staff at the hospital, I found myself wondering, what if that really was Jesus? Is this how we treat our prophets in the 21st century? Detain them under the Mental Health Act and dismiss their enlightened wisdom as insane ramblings? When those Christian types write the New of the New Testament, will I play the role of the Romans at the original crucifixion?
Nice.
This last story, I will read. A little bit hesitant about it. This was called Saturday Morning Floggings. I cracked open the heavy metal door and listened to it creak like a rusty cliche on its ancient hinges. Inside the cell was dark, gloomy to the point where I needed to squint to help adjust my vision quickly so I could force the horrific sight that confronted me through my protesting eyes into a never again to be innocent mind. I found it impossible not to recoil in shock, but I held my ground. This was the first time I'd ever seen another man masturbating, in real life anyway. Lying on the bed completely naked and battering his small and half-flaccid cock was Mark. Mark was in his 40s and when standing was a tall and morbidly obese man who always stooped as he shuffled along the corridors, no doubt weighed down by that massive gut which hung halfway down his thighs. His rapidly receding black hair and silly little moustache made him resemble at first glance the nightmarish bastard child of a sumo wrestler and Hitler. But the thing I remember most about Mark were his eyes, which were pitch black, caused by medication, and they would roll back in his head as he moved around while his mouth would routinely droop open, revealing a gulp full of missing and rotting teeth. Mark was like some type of retarded limbering and constantly feasting great white shark. He was truly a monster amongst monsters, and not just by appearances either, but by his deeds before coming inside. And here was this great beast laid stark as before me on an otherwise normal Saturday morning, dick in hand, his great hairy gut overflowing down one side of his body and resting comfortably on the bed like an entirely separate creature. Most unnervingly, he was looking straight at me while he whacked away, showing no signs of slowing down. Mark, for fuck's sake, knock it off. No response, he even picked up the pace. Mark, you fucker, Mark, knock it off now. I picked up a magazine that was lying on the desk beside me and rolled it up tight. I held it up as if making a silent threat, and he called my bluff. I bought that magazine sound so hard on his knob that I felt it rebound off his balls. Mark barely flinched. He casually let go of his dick and put his hand on his belly. While still staring straight at me, he calmly grumbled, "Don't." It was the one and only word I ever heard him speak. I'll give one more quick story. This one's called Payback. This is what I did for 60 seconds last year, which should not have been done in 60 seconds, which is why I was disqualified. But anyway, this is called Payback. I lean against the bonnet of the car and look down on the drunk sitting in the gutter before me, his well-lived-in head being propped up by two unstable and bloodied hands, his clearly broken left ankle making his foot point an ungodly west while the rest of him faces south. Man, that's gotta hurt, I serve up in my best deadpan. What happened? Fucking missus, mate. Drank the last of my bean, the slut did. She jumped on my fucking leg. I didn't do anything. Spit machine guns out of his mouth through cracked lips and missing teeth and falls onto the asphalt in the no man's land between us. He slams his fist down on his leg as if to emphasise the point and naturally winces. His foot jiggles a little bit like an afterthought. That really, really must sting. In the distance, I can hear the wail of the approaching ambulance. I try to think to myself that if this guy wasn't so absolutely and completely smashed right now, he would be writhing on the ground in agony with an ankle like that. So where's your missus now, I ask. Over the road at Aunt Jenny, he grimaces. And what do you want me to do about it? Fucking nothing. Just wanted you here so she didn't kill me, really. I knew this guy, although I didn't tell him that. I know that he bashes his girlfriend, and he's done time for it. So really, this is probably a case of payback, or self-defence on the part of his woman. Either way, I'm thinking Karma's a bitch, and this guy's got his comeuppance. An uncomfortable silence fills the air, and I look up at the full moon for some momentary respite. I see an imaginary question mark silhouetted against the shimmering white lunar glow, and figure that pretty much sums up this whole situation. The ambulance is getting closer, but not close enough. So I can rip into her now, right? She deserves a kick in the cunt for this, and I can do that now, right? Because she broke my fucking leg. Doesn't work like that, mate. Self-defence is good for much after the event. The ambulance tears down the road and pulls into the car park. I step away and let the paramedics try to stand him up. He falls down like a metaphoric sack of shit, necessitating the introduction of the gang. Only his dignity remains on the floor. Thank you. Finish off with two quick little poems. First one's called Day Fuckers. Sweat mingling with the juices of lust, tingle and tease my taste buds as I kiss slowly up your thigh, lapping at your swollen, begging for mercy, hog-tied with cum-soaked sheets, the taste of sexual satiation and the heavy scent of fuck, the sounds of breathless passion, the sight of straining, plunging into open, and the feel of skin friction, naked fire, a rhythm that rocks the neighbourhood, driving me primal, flash flooding, followed by the resurrection. Third chime is a charm. Roll up, it's the best show in town. We fuck with the curtains open. Thank you.
Cool. Next up, we have some medication with the doctor. I was going to read a long poem that referenced the doctor called A Night at the Greyhound because he was there that night. And the chick next to me pulled a root. But, you know, we live, we learn, we get over. So, here, Doctor, this one's for you. You're nearly ready. I'm going to read a short poem, then your intro, and then you're on. Suburbia 5. The boy with the cleft palate cannot pronounce the name of his own disability. The greatest tragedy of all is inaction.